so let's get into it. So how to set a sponge filter up is you'll need an air pump. I tend to use the Whisper Quiet air pumps. They're, for me, just the quietest and the easiest to set up, most reliable. And yeah, so that's what this is. They come in a variety of different strengths and different sizes. Different size air pumps will run different size filters. Okay, so you're gonna need airline tubing. That's what I have right here. It's just some Super Flex. They have it in black, they have it in clear, all different colors of airline tubing. The only thing you need to pay attention to is some of them have different diameters. So depending on the fittings you use, you just want to make sure you have the right diameter airline tubing for the fittings you have. All right. So to set one of these bad boys up, we'll go from the sponge filter to the air system. Okay. So here's our sponge filter. We'll start with the small one right here. Okay. It's got some different parts to it. It's got a collar that kind of forces the air that comes up out of here into one direction. All right, and then these sponge filters that I use actually have built-in air stones. Okay, so this right here, this little piece kind of acts like an air stone. So, which is this right here. Okay, and some companies suggest that you, kind of rig up your sponge filter with like this air stone kind of thing to get more use out of it, whatever. We don't really need to do that with this type. I'll have a link down in the description for how to get these. They're really cheap. They're like $5 for 3. And this size can run up to a 10-gallon tank, depending on your bio load. It really is, it depends. So anyways, you have the air stone built in, capped right there. And you can take this all apart for making it easy to clean. All right, that little basket just slips into our sponge. Clip that together. We have our air collar here. You slide that over your hose. Take that airline connector and connect it into the top of the sponge filter. And we have this collar. It slides back down and connects back onto the sponge filter. Okay. Boom. So then you would have this in a fish tank. All right. And the line is going to go over the edge there and it's going to drip down. So what some people worry about with a sponge filter system running air is that in the case that maybe your pump fails or you have a power outage, water can tend to siphon back up and out, and it can drain your water or drain the water out of your tank rather quickly. All right, you can come back and you can have an empty tank. So what we like to do, take some aquascaping scissors here, is we're going to cut the line over the tank, so it'll be outside of the tank, dangling out there. I just don't have a lot of line to work with here, so because we're going to do a couple different experiments here. So then I'm going to put the overflow. You look on it and there's an arrow. You want the arrow pointing to which way the air is pushing. So if you blow into it, you can only blow one way. So you know your pump's going to be on one side. You want the air to flow away from the pump, because it's pushing. So we connect that in between. That's going to keep us from having a bad day. Okay. One other thing that you might want to hook up before you hook up your airline is possibly a variable on-off valve. Okay. These things control the amount of air that a specific tank gets from a pump. So if you're trying to hook up multiple tanks to one air pump, you'll need one of these or a couple of these, maybe one for each tank, and that way you can kind of meter the amount of air that each tank is getting. Problem when you're using one pump or one sponge filter on one pump is if you have one of these variable on-off valves, if you turn it down, you're going to increase the back pressure on your air pump here. What happens with that is it actually gets hotter it wears faster, and it won't last as long. So that is something to keep in mind. It also can be louder. But if you have to work with what you got and you need to do that for some reason, that's one way to do it. So we'll cut that out and we'll put this right in line here. Boom. 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 All right, so now we have on-off valve, and these don't really matter which direction you put them in. Okay? And then we connect this to our air pump. Okay, so now we have our sponge filter system. Now there's different types of these on-off valves. I have these ones right here, these fancy ones. This could actually split it off to 3 or 2 tanks. This would be your supply line. It caps off here, and then you'd hook up your 2 tanks to this. These are kind of nice. I like using just these individual ones per tank. They're just easier to deal with personally. These things are kind of a pain in the butt, harder to adjust. All right, so that's it. That's how you set up a sponge filter. Super easy. Okay, now the rest of the video will go further into, like, you know, what kind of sponge filters would you need? Why would you want to use sponge filters? All right, so sponge filters come in all different sizes. We have large ones like this. We got super tiny ones like this. And it just depends on the amount of filtration you want. Now, another thing is the porosity of the sponge. These are all pretty fine sponges, which means they get clogged quicker, but it'll also filter your water better. The best water clarity filter anyone will tell you is like a sump filter or a hang on the back filter or the canister filters. Personally, I like these because if you're running any of like the dirted style tanks or anything like that, you get your water gets stirred up a little less. Meaning that your dirted substrate, if you're running just a straight dirted tank, which believe it or not, you can, I just wouldn't recommend it, has a chance to actually let the mud, dirt, whatever you want to call it, settle down to the bottom and actually give you pretty clear water. Now, I run sponge filters in all my tanks because when you get past, 5 tanks, you kind of need to. It's super hard to maintain 18 different, hang on the backs. So that's one benefit of a, air sponge system is you can run multiple tanks and the maintenance is just way easier to keep up with. It makes more sense. Yeah. But speaking of your tank being biologically active, a bigger tank with a bigger bioload needs a bigger sponge filter. All right. So these are relative to the tank size. The advertisement says that these can go about to a 10-gallon, but is that relative to what? If you have more fish in there, if you have a breeder tank of 10, if you have a 10-gallon breeder tank filled with a bunch of guppies are growing out, you probably would rather have this in that tank rather than some tiny thing like this. I don't know, but it's always relative to the situation you have going on, so make sure you keep that in mind when you have any decisions like this. Bigger bioload, bigger filtration. Generally, that's the way to go. Okay, so now here's a physical demonstration of how these on-off valves work here. You can see that we've got a pretty steady flow, and I don't know if you guys can hear the vibration from the air pump, but we have the restriction turned up pretty high. I could turn it all the way off and it gets louder, and that airflow is turned completely off. But then the more I open it up, the more airflow we have, the quieter this air pump will actually get. Okay, that's because we're putting back pressure and it's working harder to move the water. Now you can see there's a good amount of airflow, and you can see particles in the water going all over. If you guys want to check that out closer, it's making a mess. But yeah, so super basic, easy way to set up a filtration system. Now this still isn't going to filter anything biologically right now. It would filter mechanically, meaning it would physically take particles out of the water, but it is not active biologically, meaning it does not have any of the beneficial bacteria you need yet, and you would still need to cycle, age, however you refer to that, your tank, okay? You would still need to make sure your tank is biologically active, but that's how you set up a sponge filter. I also have another video, guys, that you can check out, and I'll link it in this video here, about how to hook up multiple sponge filters to one air pump. It's nice to balance a couple tanks with one air pump, and I got a super simple way to do it, and you guys can check that video out. Thanks for watching, guys.